Hello, Steve White's 89. Well, I'm feeling a bit nostalgic. I've been making videos, just sort of sharing some of my experiences, and I just wanted to sort of talk about my sort of favourite time that I ever had in life. When I was at university, the first 4 years of university, which I'll explain some other time, I had grown up in a small town in Tasmania. Loved it when I was a little kid, but then hated it when I was getting older, of course. I studied in Launceston, year 11 and 12, and then I moved to Ballarat for a year because I couldn't get into the course I wanted, and I had to get into the system so I could get into the course through the system. And I did a year in Ballarat, and Ballarat just felt like moving to Launceston. I didn't feel like I'd really gone anywhere. But when I moved to Melbourne, it was where I'd always dreamed of living. I always wanted to live in Melbourne. I always grew up wanting to live in Melbourne. It's one of the greatest cities in the world. It was just recently voted the most friendliest city in the world, and it's often voted one of the best cities of the world. And I'm really grateful to have grown up here, and all the things I sort of missed out on as a kid, I always sort of wanted. I sort of said, I'm going to move somewhere where I can have those things. I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, well, I miss out because I live here. No, I'm going to go where the stuff is. So that's what I did, go where the lights are. So that's what I did. And the first 4 years, though, were very insular, but I loved them. I moved into a place that was across from a video store. Now, when I first came to Melbourne, I didn't know anyone, didn't know where I was going. I basically did what Susan did, and suddenly Susan, I basically packed a case, went there with a bag, and I just put my bag in one of the lockers at the train station and just went out and found somewhere to stay. I stayed the first night on the couch of my sister's ex, who she had one of my nieces with, the second one, and the third one. He told me about this pub that had rooms above it that were very cheap. Now, they didn't have a kitchen, so the idea was you would live there and you would basically eat downstairs. And since most of the people who lived in the building were alcoholics, they would drink downstairs all day as well. So they kind of had a live-in income, but I was just sort of being a student. But for me, it was all about the video store. The video store was a movie land, had a big pink neon sign out the front, and the building itself was sort of like a blue-grey. So at night, when the sign was lit up, it glowed pink. So I was on the third floor of a third-story building, and I'd just say it was my pink palace. Like, oh, where do you live? Oh, up in the pink palace up there. And I loved it. Basically, they had a deal because, I mean, if you all don't know the joy of Blockbuster and, video stores, I grew up in my town. We did have a couple of video stores. They weren't great. They weren't extensive. They kind of moved around, but I did love them. And we eventually got one big one that lasted quite a while. But and then you sort of found ones in the city that had different things, and all the movies you couldn't find, then you found. But this one was quite a good one, and it was a chain too, so I could get videos moved over from other stores if I couldn't find them. But basically they had this great deal where it was like, it started off being 7 movies for $7 because new releases were always a hassle. They were expensive, you couldn't find them, people always had them out. So I focused on the weeklies, and because I was studying cinema and media, I was always trying to find the old films I needed to watch for my class. And I was also into old films, and especially into slashers. So I was always looking for old horror movies. Like, most of the movies I rented were just old horror movies, like what I needed for school, and then horror movies. And that was my life. I just had the student life. I was full of study, so I didn't have to work during the vacations, so I didn't. I had some trauma I was dealing with anyway, so I kind of couldn't. But through the holidays, because you were continuing on studying, they just kept paying you through. So I'd go home and visit my family for a couple of weeks, but then I'd come back to Melbourne. And for the most part, I just lived in this little bubble where I just basically would go out to the video store, rent movies, and every night watch them. They extended this deal to 10 movies for $10, and then it was like additional $1 up to 14. So I get 14 movies for $14, and every day of the week I would have a double feature every night, either 2 movies or catching up with Star Trek, because this was back in the day when they had Star Trek coming out on video, and we got videos of Star Trek before we got Star Trek on TV. So you'd watch the videos, and then you watch it on TV and tape it off TV and keep it. And sometimes people would buy the X rentals, but for the most part, you just rented them and bought the good episodes and then taped the rest off TV. So that's what we did. But yeah, it was just this really amazing little cocoon of a time that I was in that I don't think I could ever replicate because of the nature of the media. Because I didn't have, I got a phone while I was living there, but not everyone had phones, not everyone used them. I mean, we had them, but just like, laptops and the internet, it was there, we kind of used it, but it wasn't everyday life yet. It wasn't at the tip of our fingers all the time. So I kind of had this little bubble that I could just sort of slip into the fantasy of all these films and movies and books I was reading and just stay in that bubble for days or weeks as long as I wanted and didn't get interrupted. I loved it. And I don't think I can ever replicate that again. But I just wanted to share that because it was the best time of my life. And it sort of involved, in part, the Blockbuster, video rental experience. And I just wanted to share that because I know there's some people who sort of, covet those days. And, that was my experience. Best time of my life, sadly. Not the best time, just one of them.